In 1976, over 40 years ago, elite passengers were crossing the Atlantic in under 3.5 hours, flying at twice the speed of sound in the Anglo-French Concorde. Only 20 of the sleek delta-wing supersonic transports were built, and just 14 were delivered to two airlines, 7 each to Air France and British Airways. With superlative service and cuisine, exclusive airport lounges, and stratospherically high airfares, Concorde passengers flew far above other flights and cruised faster than fighter jets to their destinations. Concorde's last commercial flight landed 15 years ago on October 24, 2003. We had supersonic travel within our grasp between the 70s all the way up to the eve of the 21st century. Why has it become a relic of the past and a symbol of what could have been the desired method of air travel? The Concorde, an engineering marvel and aviation icon, was a triumphant display of 1960s French-British relations and demonstrated the capability to fly supersonic in an optimistic aviation sector, striving to connect people in short amounts of time. However, throughout the years up till its retirement in 2003, the Concorde was tragically not economically viable, environmentally sound, and the advent of the wide-bodied aircraft made the aviation industry turn profit over speed. The 1960s was a decade marked by relentless optimism for the future. Laser beams, satellites, and moon landings, this was a decade in which the world was changing quickly. In just a few short years, propeller-driven aircraft had been replaced by sleek new jetliners. While this new jet age was exciting, many were expecting an even bigger leap forward. Air travel was about to get a whole lot faster. Starting in the 50s, propeller-driven airliners could take 15 hours to fly from New York to London. In the 60s, a subsonic jet made that same flight in around 7 hours. But many were expecting by the 70s, supersonic transports would be replacing jets, and they would fly 2 or even 3 times the speed of jetliners, and that would cut a New York to London flight down to under 3 hours. By the end of the 70s, hundreds of these supersonic transports were expected to be flying. On November 29, 1962, Britain and France signed an agreement to share costs and risks in producing a supersonic transport. The orders came in very early, the aviation industry was very excited, and supersonic flight was in its infancy. The idea of going supersonic was thrilling, and Concorde was the way forward. Airlines across the world responded with great excitement, 16 airlines ordering some 75 aircrafts. The Concorde was a feat of engineering when it was first unveiled in March 5, 1969. The aircraft could hold up to 100 passengers and traverse the Atlantic at nearly 1,400 miles per hour, more than twice the speed of a standard plane. Its ultra-slim body, delta-wing design, Olympus turbojet engines, and its droop-snoot nose gave the Concorde a look more akin to a military jet or space shuttle than a standard commercial airliner. The Concorde became the most overall successful venture into the supersonic transports. Its competition, the Soviet Union's Tupolev Tu-144 and America's Boeing 2707, could not even come close to the Concorde's resume. The Tu-144 was basically a flawed, rushed carbon copy of the Concorde. The plane was ultimately a commercial blunder due to design flaws, and economically, there was no real need for high-speed passenger transportation over the Soviet Union. Also, public opinion surrounding the Tu-144 had essentially faltered in the world's eyes as a result of a 1973 Paris Airshow incident where the plane broke up in midair, proving Concorde's dominance and reliability over the Soviets' Concorde. But the Americans, their own version of a supersonic transport, the Boeing 2707, developed in the mid-60s, never came off the ground due to a lack of funding from the federal government. Concorde was a clear winner, as it had been the only aircraft to actually be implemented into commercial service and reliable enough to fly for 27 years. Also, Concorde became the symbol of wealth and money. When describing the Concorde, it is met with elegance, glamour, peppered with oohs and ahs, from the specialized lounges to the hospitality of the flight attendants. It was the best that money could get you.
Truly can just regard it as commuting to work. Speed is what it's all about for me. The ability to avoid these overnight flights, get to the other end fresh. That's what this great plane does.
The next category were your film stars, celebrities, pop musicians, and the whole atmosphere on the airplane was completely different from the atmosphere you'd get on a subsonic airplane. All these guys, they were constantly flying across the Atlantic on Concorde, and they all knew each other, and it was a sort of sociable event.
No matter how exciting things got, all too soon, Concorde was already on its descent. Concorde defined the glamour of high-speed flight. From an airline marketing standpoint, aircraft such as the Concorde have always been passenger favorites. From a business market view, however, frequencies of operation and schedule convenience have always won out over a carrier. But Concorde it meant offering one daily supersonic flight to a particular destination, with the high cost and only a limited amount of destinations. As a result, the original 16 airline orders for the Concorde had all been dropped, as there was no profit to be made. Air France and British Airways had to fly the Concorde as their airlines are government regulated, and their countries had used so much money for development and research to the point where it would be an embarrassment to not fly it. Noise and environmental concerns shrunk the open skies. Many countries banned it from their airspace because of the loud sonic boom it produced. As a result, nearly half the planned routes, notably those over land, were off limits. In 1964, years before the first test flight of Concorde, the U.S. Air Force and FAA ran a test of sonic booms over Oklahoma City, and residents reported hundreds of damaged windows and noise disturbances. As a result, in 1973, the FAA issued regulation that prohibited flight over the speed of sound above the U.S. or a certain distance from U.S. shores. Any chance of flying lucrative U.S. transcontinental routes were locked out, thus impacting the sales potential of the Concorde, and it became detrimental to the viability of any future supersonic transport. Even though the Supreme Court intervened and lifted parts of the ban in 1977, it meant that the aircraft could only fly to certain airports such as New York's JFK Airport or Washington's Dulles Airport. Even then, a massive fleet of supersonic planes would have probably caused real damage, setting red flags for a supersonic future. An anti-supersonic movement had grown from a handful of concerned citizens to a major national coalition of environmental organizations. Growing public opposition to sonic booms had spread to other kinds of fears wherever it flew. Some worried that hundreds of supersonic airliners flying at a high altitude would emit enough nitrogen oxide to destroy the ozone layer. They painted this picture of a dystopian future, where exhaust gases and water vapor would cover the earth in a permanent haze. Thus, before Concorde could even take flight in 1976, it was already being scrutinized by the general public. Also, fuel requirements limited its range to transatlantic journeys without any trans-Pacific cash cows. It guzzles so much fuel that price fluctuations could hit particularly hard. With ticket prices as high as $12,000, that was a significant risk. Ticket prices had to be expensive because at most, only 120 passengers could have been put on the plane. The price tag couldn't be distributed, which was compounded by the need for specially qualified crew members and maintenance, which was all for a very demanding crowd. With that in mind, it was more economically viable for the airline industry to use bigger, slower, wide-bodied aircraft that are designed to have a combination of efficiency and passenger comfort over the Concorde, especially being able to spread the price tag per seat over 300 to 450 passengers depending on the type of plane. The wide-body aircraft of the time, such as the Boeing 747 or the DC-10, were more effective and accurate designs to what the true market needed, which was not how fast one can get to their destination, but how many can we get to their destination. With the environmental issues revolving around sonic booms and ozone layers, economics, and the aviation industry's favoritism of profit over speed, it slowly started to add up onto Concorde. On July 25, 2000, Air France Flight 4590 ran over debris during takeoff, blowing a tire and puncturing two of its left external fuel tanks. The subsequent fire and engine failure caused the aircraft to crash into a hotel in nearby Genoese 2 minutes after takeoff from Charles de Gaulle International. The plane exploded on impact, killing all 109 people on board and 4 people in the hotel. It was the only fatal Concorde accident during its 27-year operational history. The official French crash report concluded that there were vulnerabilities in Concorde's fuel tanks and tires. Air France and British Airways grounded their aircraft while extensive modifications were being made. They were to be launched back in November 2001. But the world moved on. The attacks on New York's Twin Towers had devastated the aviation industry. Air travel lost its appeal, and demand for business flights into New York plummeted. Concorde was crossing the Atlantic almost completely empty. Plus, maintenance costs were soaring, and so in April 2003, Concorde's retirement was announced. It wasn't luxury anymore. The whole idea of the Concorde was to create the most efficient way that crossed the Atlantic for the business traveler. But with fully flat beds on wide-bodied aircraft, with way more amenities, space, and perks than the Concorde, those traveling towards Europe could leave the US in the evening, get their night's sleep on the plane, and wake up in Europe, essentially wasting no time. No longer luxurious or even efficient, the Concorde flew its final commercial flight on October 24, 2003, thereby ending the era of commercial supersonic flight.